5, 4, 3. The year is 1968. I'm sitting in a homeroom at Muskegon High School when suddenly on comes the public address system.
This is the MHS Morning News, and I'm Harry Brown.
That's what I heard all those years ago. I'm Leonard Harvey, also known as Steve James. And this is another edition of our Radio Legends series, this time with Harry William Brown, the legendary broadcaster who worked for several years at WMUS Radio. He actually took a brief stint at WDAI-FM in Chicago, the FM of WLS, and made his name probably even bigger and better as a longtime teacher of how to use your computer over at Muskegon Community College. And Harry, how long were you there teaching?
1980 through 2011. So that's 31 years altogether.
Wow.
Some of it actually was concurrent with working at the radio station. I taught initially a class in basic programming. That's with a capital B.
Okay.
The one that Bill Gates and Paul Allen put together at Harvard back in 75. And then Kemeny and Kurtz wrote in 63. Sorry, had to throw it in.
Sure.
Because I have to give credit. But in any case, that's the language that I taught. And was the first language that I used to write the radio system for MUS and other radio stations across the country.
Yeah, which you had a program that you sold to other radio stations.
Yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning of the radio career. Now we know what I assume your first exposure to the concept of being an announcer was probably at Muskegon High School, I'm assuming, in the capacity of doing the MHS Morning News.
Yeah, in a formal capacity like that, it was the same individual got us involved that I know got you involved, and that was Frank Poling.
Yep.
Our speech teacher.
The legendary Frank Poling.
He most definitely was a terrific guy, but I was taking a class in speech. We were required to take that. That
was it from Mr. Poling?
Yeah.
Okay.
From Mr. Poling.
All right.
And that was in 10th grade, as I recall. And so he talked to me afterwards, and he said, Harry, are you interested in being on the radio? I said, well, no, I hadn't really thought of it. I was pursuing some other academic endeavors, but he said, yeah, I teach a class in radio, and I'd love to have you in it. And that was it. That was it. And he was in radio back in the 30s and the 40s.
In Battle Creek.
Yeah.
And his on-air name, do you remember?
No, I don't.
Was Frank Lynn.
Really?
Yeah, he was, Frank Poling, Franklin Poling. And he called himself Frank Lynn.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned a great deal from him, the opportunity for both of us doing the MHS Morning News. And that was a big deal. You had 2,500 students or so in 4 grades. You had staff. So when you open that mic, you're in front of 3,000 people.
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
That was a huge deal.
Yeah.
I often thought my first job in radio, and we're here to talk about you, but when we talk about MHS Morning News, I had a bigger audience doing the news on MHS than I did my first job in radio as a DJ. So, when you think about it. Now, that soon changed for both of us, when we went to MUS.
Right.
Yeah. Much larger audiences there. But
tremendous.
Yeah. But interesting. So that got you involved.
Yes.
As I recall, you competed in the news reading contest, and you made it to the state level, I believe.
Yes.
You and, I think, Bill Perry.
Yeah, Bill and I think that was at Hope College. Didn't win, but certainly competed. But on the college level, we competed down at Ohio University. Not Ohio State, Ohio University.
Yeah, right.
Athens, Ohio. And out of the nation, I came in number 2.
Wow. No kidding. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so, oh well.
Well, you
So
know,
we
the other guy cheated probably.
apparently so, right? I must have had a cold or something like
that
that.
day you weren't. Yeah. Yeah.
But that was a very big deal, and we were all excited.
That's
And,
very cool.
Yeah. So I was on the forensics team.
Okay.
I think they called it at that time. That would have been 1971.
Jeez.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. But a lot of things like that, and it was exciting. Competition is exciting, and radio is competition to a degree.
Absolutely.
But the best part of radio is when you get comfortable with it, and you can talk to that one person out there that's listening to you.
Yep.
You've heard that before. You don't talk to 10,000 people or 20,000 people. You talk to that one person, and they believe that that you are talking to them.
And that's a very specialized, either you have it skill or you don't, I believe. I think that some broadcasters inherently have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of us, we just play the records and talk really fast and get commercials aired, you know. But those people, I thought you had that. I thought Jim Cox,
He did.
I thought was amazing morning guy because everybody thought he was talking to them individually.
Yes.
Yeah, and that is that's either you have a talent or not. You can't teach it. You either got it or you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with Jim, there was no ego when you were listening to him.
That's true.
He was having fun, and you were having fun as well.
Yes.
And going in at 5:30 in the morning.
That's a little challenge.
Yeah, actually, I did that for a while. When I started at MUS, that was in September of 1970. I did weekends.
Yeah.
Did 6 p.m. to midnight on Saturday. And then on Sunday, it was 6 p.m. until it was weird, about 10:30. And it was a great training ground. And my friends in college obviously knew I was on the radio.
Yeah.
And they would listen. And they would come out to the radio station. We signed off at midnight. And they would come out to the radio station about 11:45 or so. And I'd let them in, lock the door, and they would be in the control room for the last 15 minutes. And this was a wonderland. Yeah. You know how it is for somebody who's not in radio to say, hey, you're on this mic, and they can hear you anywhere in Western Michigan? Yeah, sure.
Isn't that an amazing idea?
Very powerful.
The premise. And of course, at the time we're talking about, which is the early 70s.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
We had a different radio world then, didn't we? Than today.
Than today?
How would you describe it then versus now? What do you see are the differences?
Radio we were live. There may have been times when we might have recorded a segment, but that was very rare that we would ever do that. Every intro to a record, even a lot of commercials, were done live. Promotional tags that we would do, the weather, even some of the news headlines, if the ones that were recorded by somebody else became stale, we would do it live. That was exciting.
Good stuff.
That was exciting because you knew that if you made a mistake, that it was out there.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a second take. It was done. And therefore, the adrenaline did flow, but then it was just wonderful, absolutely great. Now, 99% of what you hear on the radio is recorded.
Yeah.
Or it's from a satellite service.
Yeah.
Well, I say that because it's often delivered via internet, but it's a service from Nashville or Los Angeles or Dallas or somewhere.
Talk a little bit too, Harry, about the difference in the ownership environment surrounding radio today versus the 1970s.
Radio and broadcasting in general thrived because of local ownership. And I think it was the intent of the FCC for that to happen, because they wanted radio and then television stations in local communities to serve the needs of those communities. And if the ownership was local, then they're connected to what's going on in their hometowns. You would know some of the people who owned it. And if a station wasn't serving the needs, there was a way of getting in contact with those who could actually make the changes. That's the way that it was. And those of us who were on the air also were based in our own local communities. We loved West Michigan. We loved Muskegon and all the cities that surround it.
Yep.
This was our area, and we were there to support it any way that we could. And people knew it.
Yep.
Now, the way that it is with companies owning 1,200, 1,500 radio stations, and that's primarily what we're talking about here,
Yep.
and they're based somewhere else.
Right.
They couldn't find Muskegon on a map unless somebody pointed, hey, it's over there, go north of Chicago. They have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
They're not connected with it. That's simply the way that it is.
Yeah.
In my opinion,
That's the world we live in.
there are very few people in local radio that are live. And if a station does hire somebody locally, then they'll record all of the intros, all of the weather, temperature, that kind of stuff in a half an hour or so and play it back all during the day. There is a big difference, and you know this as well, in doing the intro of a song, talking it up live, and listening to the beat and anticipating when those vocals are going to start,
Yeah.
versus recording it and then having a computer knowing where to start it so it ends just before the vocals. You know nothing about the way that it feels at that moment in time.
There's no texture.
There isn't.
Yep.
And you can tell. You can really tell. I loved those days. And you and I both knew that there were a couple of things that you never did. Number one, dead air.
Yep.
You never had dead air, ever. And dead air means that there's a pause and there's nothing there. So you avoid that. And
With every fiber of your being.
you have to be tight, one event after the other. And the other is in talking up a record, a song, you don't step on the vocal.
Right.
Stepping on the vocal means that the person starts to sing and you haven't introed it. You haven't finished yet.
Yep.
You don't do that.
Yep.
It happens, but you just don't do that.
Yep.
And you open up the mic and you do the intro and you close it. I know I was very upset with myself when that happened. I might have done 100 of them and I missed one and I can't get
Bums
rid of it.
out your day, doesn't it? Really does. It was an art form, I thought, to be able to take, if it was a 10-second intro,
Yeah.
and you're going, an intro meaning the musical portion prior to the vocals starting in the song.
Right.
Which you, by the way, you notice you never hear people talk up records anymore. That's not done anymore.
Yeah.
It's because you can't when you're going to pre-record everything.
No, you really can't. And you're not listening to the music as a DJ. We listen to the music.
Yeah.
And I loved the music that we were playing because I listened to the lyrics. I tried to understand what the artist and the writer of that song was trying to convey. both in the emotion that was in the vocals and in also the words themselves. And I'd like to tell a story through the music.
Yep.
And the intros, if the intro was long enough, I would try to pull something from the song and weave it into the name of the song and the artist
Yep.
to go ahead and do the intro. I'm sure you did that too.
Well, I tried. Yeah. I think you did it better than I did, though. When I think back on that too, Harry, we chose our own music. The last radio station I managed before I owned one, years, down the road, back years ago, my program director laid out all the music that the announcers played, 100%.
In order?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
You played
yikes.
everything according to the schedule and never to vary.
No.
But you and I picked our own records.
Well,
We took actual requests. There's a concept.
It certainly was a concept, and let me go ahead and give kudos to Tim Achterhoff.
Yes.
Tim Achterhoff, who was, among many things, was also the program director and music director of MUS when I was there in the early 70s. And Tim would have a top 40. So we played the top 40. Mm-hmm. But then there were other songs that were not quite in the top 40, that were in less of a rotation. And then we had older songs that we could mix in too. But the order in which you played them was up to us.
Yes.
And if, again, you were trying to tell a story, you could put that together in real time. And wow, was that exciting.
That was fun.
That was great.
And that was the art of the work, I think. That's where you felt the talent really prevailed, when you worked this business.
I've seen it. For example, if you have a good DJ at a wedding or an event, and they can feel what the crowd needs,
yes,
then they can pick the music.
Yep.
And we're on the MUS music line and talking to people, and you're talking about taking requests, you get a feeling for what they want.
Yeah.
And within certain restraints, we can give that to them. But it's not just that. We have to make sure that we're going to get the news at a certain time during the hour.
Right.
I think we often played the news at 55 minutes after the hour, mm-hmm. and there might be some local commercials, but I just thought it was fun to try to hit the top of the hour ID right on the second.
With the song. Yep. That too, again. And that's assuming that the record you were playing was accurately measured for time.
Yeah.
Most of the time, 99% of the time it was. Occasionally, you'd run into one. It was a few seconds, 3 seconds difference than what was posted on the record itself.
Honestly, it didn't matter that much if you're a few seconds off because you're just playing the next record.
Right.
But
going into the
was
news,
fun.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
And then most of the networks would have a little tone that they would play.
Yep.
And you would talk it up, and then there it was. Mutual broadcasting. Yeah.
So before we get into chronologically reviewing your career here, this raises the question to me, Harry. If you are Harry Brown or Steve James today, how do you get into radio? Where do you go to become a broadcaster? Where does the next Bobby Bones on MUS, who does mornings on hundreds of radio stations for iHeart, I believe they're an iHeart group, where does the next Bobby Bones or any of them come from? How do they develop their skill, their talents to become that broadcaster? How does that work? I don't. Do you have an answer? I don't.
No, because it ties in with what we talked about before, in that the programming is dictated from elsewhere, and the talent, for the most part, is from elsewhere. So therefore, if you live in a community, years ago, you would have 5 or 6 radio stations from which to go and try to get a job, maybe on weekends or all night or whatever it happened to be. And then you could hone your skills from that point. Now, it doesn't work that way. How do you make that happen?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's really tough.
Yeah.
You can't work your way up. Now, there are a few, and you know this, there are a few radio stations around the country that have live DJs that are locally owned. And when I'm driving somewhere across the U.S., I like to listen to AM or FM radio. And when I find something like that and there's a real person on the air, that's great.
Yeah.
Because it's rare.
It's super rare. Yeah.
I had a discussion. The family is friends with a man named Brian Nutter. And Brian Nutter was the lead guitarist for Keith Urban for a long time, 7, 8, 9 years. And he's been on television, the CMA Awards, for example, Good Morning America, the Grammys, everything. And we became friends with this guy through our daughter, Melissa. And that story could take long enough just by itself. But I brought this up with him. And he and his wife, he left Keith, and they were trying to make it on their own. And I said, Brian, in the old days, if somebody wanted to make it in the music business, especially country, which I knew very well, you could go to local radio stations and promote your product. You could talk to the program director, music director, station manager, DJs occasionally, and they might even play your record, and they might even interview you live.
Like Loretta Lynn.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
what she did.
Coal Miner's Daughter. If you
Right.
watch a movie,
Right.
you see what happened. What chance do they have of that happening today? It's not going to happen.
It's zero today.
None. And the only way that you can make it is that if you are backed by these corporations, the record companies that want to promote you, and then you get a foot in the door. But somebody else is calling the shots. You're not calling the shots.
Yeah.
And making it very, very, very difficult.
Yeah. Different world.
Very different world.
Yeah. Let's take some time here and review your career. You started out in Whitehall. Was that your first job?
It
officially?
was. The first paying job I ever had for anything when I was 17, WLRC in Whitehall.
Oh, there you go.
And that was through Frank Poling. And I just finished 11th grade. And Frank said, I got a call from the manager there, and they need somebody to do weekends. What do you think?
Okay.
Well, okay.
All right.
I wasn't even driving yet. So my mom and dad would have to drive me up to Whitehall.
I love it. Oh, that's great.
And do my shift and pick me up. But that was very exciting. Extremely nervous.
And you were how old?
17.
17.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was an interesting training ground, and it was, I think, what you would call at that time a middle-of-the-road radio station. They played pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And
though I thought
do
they
the news
tended to
live.
lean towards pop music a little bit at that time, didn't they? No?
No,
Not really. Huh?
not.
Was that later?
Not in my time.
Okay. That was later.
They even
then.
played Don McNeil, I think, the Breakfast Club.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. Good morning to you.
I love it.
This is a show.
You're right. That was a middle of the road
Yeah.
station. Yeah.
This was a show out of the 40s.
Wow.
And there was still, this is 1968. So Yeah, it's not too far away from that.
Yeah.
But they played that kind of thing.
Okay.
And pretty much they had a library and play whatever you wanted to.
Okay. So how long were you there?
I was there for a year.
Okay.
And there was a time when they needed somebody middays, but I'm in high school. So talk to Frank and some of the other teachers and think, oh, wow, this is cool. My student's going to be on the radio. Yeah, okay. I was doing well in high school, so it really didn't matter much.
Right.
So I left at 9:30 and drove up there, and I did the shift until 1 o'clock, and then came back and finished my high school day.
I love it. Boy, you went that. I don't know if you'd see that happen today either.
That was great.
And then how did you? Was MUS next in the?
That was 1969
Okay.
when I quit.
Okay.
And then the reason that I quit is that small radio station, this is just me, small radio station, equipment failures. And anytime you have an equipment failure, it makes you look bad.
Yeah, sure does.
So if you're playing a tape or a cart or a record or anything and it fails, that's really embarrassing.
Big time. Yep.
Really embarrassing. So
Am I to gather you had that happen too often?
many times.
Yeah.
So this was the end of Harry Brown at WLRC.
And you always used Harry Brown on the
Yeah,
air.
I did. It was
Yeah.
it was always that name.
Yeah.
And then, but one thing, I'm going to turn around here for a second.
Sure.
Let's see if we can see this on camera.
Oh, I love it. Oh, yeah.
Because it all ties together.
Yeah.
This is a photo that I took of the Saturn V, the Apollo 11 spacecraft,
Okay.
the night before it took off. It took off in July of 1969.
When you were still working at WLRC.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And I took the photo, and we were among the last 20 or so people, civilians, to be that close, and we were really close
Okay.
before they fueled it up, and that was it. But I was working at LRC, and I was able to get a press pass for myself and also a friend of mine named Andy Hubble. And we drove down, and we saw everything.
That's
We saw it all. We were doing that. We saw the liftoff. That famous, this is all because of radio.
yeah.
That famous walk that the astronauts take when they're suited up and they're carrying their oxygen packs. And they walk down this ramp and they make a left turn and they get into what's called the transfer van that takes them out to the pad.
Yeah.
And 18-year-old Harry Brown is standing right there where they make that turn. Wow. That was
Wow.
fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
You see it all the time. And I always think, oh my gosh, I was really there. And then the other part of it, for a news person, I was at the press center. And so people that
So you had a press
knew-
pass to be at all of these
Oh, yeah.
events. Then. Because you were
Well-
on radio.
Well, on radio.
Yeah, I love
There's
it.
Walter Cronkite walking over by this giant CBS building. They have smoke glass, so I couldn't see in.
Yeah.
Well, Walter was in there.
Wow.
And
Wow.
David Brinkley.
That's cool.
Chet Huntley, I think, was in New York, but David Brinkley was down there. And Frank Reynolds,
Yeah.
ABC,
Was Harry Reasoner there? Or not?
Jules Bergman.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
All these famous people,
Yeah.
broadcasters,
And then
basically.
from all over the world, too, and I got to talk with so many of them.
Oh, that's
But
really
you're down,
amazing.
you're on an equal footing.
What an amazing story.
There were 4,000 press passes that were provided. 4,000 for the entire world. And my friend and I were 2 out of those 4,000.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
That's
that-
fantastic. I love it. What a
Norman-
great story.
Norman Mailer,
Yeah.
Norman Mailer, famous author, writer, wrote a series of articles for Life magazine. And I read them a few years ago. He was on that little bus that I was on.
Wow.
Of course, I wouldn't know who Norman Mailer was in 1969.
Yeah.
He's a writer. I didn't know what he looked like.
Right. Yeah, correct.
And then there were photos from Life magazine. This is tell this story because it's true and it's kind of exciting. We're there in total darkness, and so my friend had matches, and he light his match so I could see the light meter. And there was another photographer next to us who was from Life magazine.
Right.
He couldn't see his light meter to determine how to set his camera for the shutter speed f-stop.
Yeah.
So my friend Andy struck a match, and he could determine how to set his camera. Those photos appeared in Life magazine.
Wow. Yeah,
My photo appears in my office.
yeah, that's incredible.
But yeah, that's a
What
true
an
story.
amazing spin-off story on the LRC experience.
1970, there was another friend of ours, colleague named Bill Perry.
Yes.
And Bill Perry was on the air at MUS. And Tim Achterhoff was looking for somebody, and I alluded to that a few moments ago, to do weekends, we'll call it. And Bill recommended me, and Tim called me, and I talked to him for a bit, and he offered me the job. And on MUS, that's a big deal.
Yes, it was.
Even working weekends, it's a big deal. It gets a lot of attention. So that's when I started. And then to jump ahead, there was another friend of mine, and I'm not going to mention who it is, but he didn't show up for the morning show.
Gee, that never happened.
He didn't show up. So if you don't show up, the station's not on the air. Wonderful.
Because they signed off at midnight.
Well, yeah. And they
In those days.
signed back on at 5:30.
Right.
So this happened several times, and Tim had enough, and he wondered if I could do the morning show. Well, I was going to college. So, okay, if I take classes starting at 10 o'clock, and I'm on at 5:30, and I get off at 10, and I talk to my speech teacher. I was taking a speech class in college. She said, yeah, I mean, you're learning more being on the radio than in my class. So if you show up 20 minutes late, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. And she would listen to me every morning going in. So
Yeah.
a lot of people,
You were her star pupil.
I think, yeah, it's probably possible.
Well, you were on the radio.
Yeah,
Of
I'm on the
course you
radio.
were.
I'm
Yeah.
famous.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you
I'm
were the
only kidding
ultimate
about
speech
that.
student, you know.
But did that. Mornings were tough, and getting up. I lived with my mom and dad, City of Muskegon. Get up 5 o'clock or shortly thereafter, throw on some clothes, get in the car. I get to the station at 5:25, signed on at 5:30. You'd have to turn the transmitters on at 5:29 to warm them up.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's first. It was the FM. The AM went on later. If the sunrise was later than that, cue up a record during the playing of the national anthem, which was on cart, and away we go.
Yep.
And I would bring along my towel, deodorant, new clothes, and when the records, I'd run into the bathroom, get cleaned up and ready for the day.
Now you did the morning show, but would it be safe to say you were best remembered at MUS for your very extremely popular midday show you did?
Middays better suited to that.
Yes.
So Tim moved me into middays, and I was okay with that. It wasn't a conflict with going to college.
Was that like 10 to 2, 10 to 3, something like
It
that?
varied.
Yeah.
Yeah. That time frame, and that was a really good fit.
Yeah.
Very good fit. I think the audience that we attracted, and also for for me, it fit into my life really well.
And you did a program called What's Cooking with Harry Brown?
True.
Yeah.
Tim Achterhoff's idea, I still have the Betty Crocker cookbook downstairs in the kitchen. But the idea was that if you determined what I was making that day, then you'd win a prize. And it was usually some prize that advertiser would provide, or it was a free record album or something like that.
But it was
or tickets
hugely
to a
popular.
concert. Oh, yeah.
That show was.
So I would give out, well, the first ingredient is a quarter cup of sugar. Oh, the phones would light up. And, oh, you're baking a chocolate cake. No, German chocolate. How did you know that? I'm just saying. But yeah, and sometimes it would go on for a while.
Yeah.
And then you'd eventually have a winner when you gave enough of the ingredients. It was a great contest, and it was a lot of fun too.
Yeah. Now, there was a time when you were at MUS where you were approached by WTRU. Is that correct?
That's true.
True. Yeah. No pun intended.
Yeah, there was a time when Tim Achterhoff left MUS for about a year.
To be in the funeral home business
That's
with
correct.
his father. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And he had gone to mortuary school.
Yep.
And a new program director / manager that was brought in. And the guy was fine, but it wasn't Tim.
Yeah.
And so I flirted with the idea of going to True. And I had verbally accepted that. And then Tim announced that he was returning. And I told him, sorry, I'm staying right here.
I always think back on those times that Tim Achterhoff was offered a job at True Radio, but they wouldn't let him announce on the air. So he didn't take the job. I was offered a chance to be sales manager at True, but at that point it was the late 70s. And I was like, hey, I'm sorry, but why would I work on an AM station when I'm with an FM powerhouse? And then I went to Duluth to work at their FM in Duluth, Minnesota. So how long were you at MUS, and where did you go from there, Harry?
On and off from 1970 until 1982.
Okay.
Those were on-air years, though, from 70 until 80. And I was in college concurrently, so therefore sometimes I was full-time and sometimes I was part-time. But those were the years. And then for 2 years after that, I did production, commercials.
Yeah.
And then I had written a software package that managed the ads that would play on the radio.
Okay.
It's called Traffic. And that took a job that our secretaries did at the radio station, and primary person who was way beyond a secretary, office manager, could do anything, Fran Sova.
Yep.
That took her from doing that all day long to about an hour.
Yeah.
And about putting contracts in maybe 15, 20 minutes a day. And you'd hit a button and it would print out the log in 30 minutes. Of course, you didn't have to babysit it, just printed it out.
And how many you had several radio stations purchase this product from you beyond just MUS.
Yeah, all together, AM and FM, there were about 100.
Wow.
And that was
impressive.
Through the late 80s and early 90s. And all the stations that MUS owned, and they owned stations other than in Muskegon.
Yeah, I ran KQ in Duluth.
Yeah.
There was Petoskey JML. There was PLY, Plymouth, Wisconsin.
Yep, all that.
Did that play a role in you ultimately getting into the teaching position at Muskegon Community College? Or no?
It did. By developing the software, and there's only really one way to know how to program really well, and that's doing it.
Yeah.
I probably knew basic and how it could be applied, basically computer language, and how it could be applied to writing software better than anybody that I knew.
All right.
This was a huge project.
Yeah.
And I threw myself into it initially for about 4 months, working on it 20 hours a day.
Yeah.
I get to sleep at 2 in the morning and get up at 6, and I did that 7 days a week for 4 months to get it off the ground because I knew what I could do with it. And I made the deal with Tim and also Bunker Rogoski, who was president of the corporation that owned MUS and others,
Right.
that I said I could do this, but I'm going to take on all of the financial responsibility. I will write it. I will buy all the equipment. I will demonstrate it. If it works exactly the way that I said it would work, then you can pay me.
Yeah.
And if it didn't, you lose nothing. Bunker said, okay. So in 4 months, I demoed it to Fran. She went nuts about it.
Oh, that.
And it went live. This is probably the worst possible time to do it. It went live in December of 1978.
When the commercial logs were loaded.
Loaded.
Yes.
And it worked.
And it worked.
And it worked. And during the whole time that I was involved, we never missed a single day from 1978 to 1992.
Beautiful. Before we run out of time,
Yeah.
DAI FM Chicago. Tell me about your brief experience with that station. It's the FM of WLS, correct?
It is. Now it's WLS-FM, owned by ABC.
Okay.
There was a new station in Muskegon, WQWQ, that went on the air. I think it was late 1971, early 1972.
Summer of 71. I worked there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Summer of 71.
Yeah.
So the manager of the station called me, and he wanted me to come over there. And I said, no, I'm not going to leave MUS. I'm sorry. And he kept upping the money that I would get. He said, well, I'll double your salary that you're making at MUS. And
That's always a bad sign, you know?
so I approached Tim, and I said, well, he's going to double my salary. And Tim said, I don't know. I don't know if we can do that.
You're rubbing your leg.
Yeah.
Gee, where have I seen that before? Poor
I'm
Tim.
sorry, Tim. But I don't know if we can do that. That's more than I make.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, come on, Tim. So anyway, he made me an offer which was close.
Yeah.
So I said, nah, I can't do that. Well, the manager WQWQ had a connection to the station in Chicago.
Okay.
There was a kid in Ann Arbor who was working at the station, and he knew him, and he knew there was an opening. And he maneuvered that. And one day I'm on the air, I get a call from this guy in Chicago. He's, yeah, I'm the program director of WDAI, ABC owned and operated in Chicago,
Right.
WLS-FM. And we'd like to have you send us an air check. I said, really? Yeah. So I sent it, and he said, okay, you're hired.
Love it.
So that was it. And the station is in the Stone Container Building, 360 North Michigan Avenue.
Yeah, been there.
Big deal.
Yep.
And as I recall, I think the FM station was on the 5th floor, and the 6th floor was WLS-AM. So, and
you got to meet several of the personalities.
oh yeah, we
for
went
the
up,
radio station.
yeah, at that time, and
Yeah.
we would go up to have jock meetings, as they called it, and we'd be
Yeah.
in the big conference room.
That's
Looking
cool.
around. Oh my gosh, this is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
Yeah, huge.
And one day I did 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. And I was at the station getting off the air, and walking down the hall is Paul Harvey.
Yep.
That's Paul Harvey. Now I I didn't talk to him. He was ripping the headlines to do for his show. And he did it from the same production room that we used for production as well.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
That was something. So yeah, that was a big deal, but it was not what I loved. I loved MUS. I loved the country music. Still love country music.
So you ended up coming back?
Yeah, came back, and then I worked for a time at both stations.
Yeah.
I was on the air WQWQ 6 to midnight and
You were
MUS
involved
middays.
for a while. Quickly,
Actor Hall thought it was a good idea. Said, "Yeah, you're on there, so it's going to promote us more."
I love it. I love it. How did you end up doing what was it, 30 years at the college?
Yeah, I initially I saw that there was a programming class at the college. Just for fun, I'd take the programming class, and I already knew BASIC really well, COBOL, and I did really well, extremely well. And so the instructor asked if I'd like to teach a class in BASIC. So it started from there, and I did that for a few years, and then I wrote a bunch of other software for medical office management.
Yep.
Then there was a job opening for full-time at the college, and I took that.
So with all of what you've done with your career, which spanned, what are we talking, 50 years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for
50
sure.
years working in the media business on one level or another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's something.
That's an incredible career. You've had some amazing experiences, Harry.
I think of Frank Poling, and I think of him in the classes in the late 60s, talking about him being in the radio 30 years before, 25 years before.
Yeah.
And here I am, age 72 at the time we're recording this.
Yeah.
And we're talking about being on the radio 53 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a discussion with Donna, my wife, about how important it was to have relationships with the people who worked at the radio station. These are people that are part of my life forever. There's an affinity because you know what it was like.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it was like.
Yep.
We can talk the same language. We have the same experiences, whereas somebody on the outside has no idea. They think they know, but they don't.
No, they don't.
And I think that's what brings me to being involved with our meetings once a month, of having lunch with each other,
Yeah, right.
sharing events with each other. Those were some of the best times ever.
And it's part of what created the idea that we want to do an exhibit at the Lakeshore Museum, recognizing radio's history in Muskegon. And hopefully that exhibit actually may happen sometime in 2025.
Okay.
And that's
Good.
part of the reason we're interviewing you here for the Legend series.
I
Because you
think
have so much history to share.
I think it's a really good thing. I would like to bring up a couple of events that occurred, which I think were a really big deal. We got to meet a lot of these performers.
Yes, we did.
Every performer pretty much that came to town, Tim would be the MC, but we got to go backstage.
Yep.
And that was great. So you just name all these country performers from the 70s, and we've either met them or we've talked to them, interviewed them on the radio.
Yep.
Charlie Pride died 2 years ago, I think, at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
And I got to talk to him when he appeared in Muskegon. Mike Murphy was at the airport and got him on the phone, and I talked to him, and
Yeah.
that was fun. So many others, the same thing, and then talking to them off the air.
Yeah.
You just name them. A lot of them really great people.
They really were. Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Johnny Hara. Johnny Hara was the Elvis impersonator.
Oh, yeah, the Elvis impersonator.
This was, Elvis died in August of 1977. And it would have been three months later, October of 77, his manager talked to Tim, and Johnny Hara was an Elvis impersonator that looked like him, sounded like him, had the Jordanaires singing backup with him.
No kidding.
Full orchestra, and that's what he was bringing to Muskegon. Well, nobody knew who he was. So he came, and I was doing middays, and Johnny came to the station and spent 3 or 4 days with me at the station in the studio talking about his life, Elvis's life, and singing live in the studio. How great that was.
That is great.
That was fantastic.
Love it.
And then Johnny went on to play Elvis in a theatrical film, a film called, as I recall, This Is Elvis. And he played Elvis in his latter years when he came into Graceland and went upstairs before he met his death. That was Johnny Hara.
Wow.
So cool.
Yeah. Very
So yeah, radio provided a lot of exciting things, and it was a major part of my life.
You know, in final note here, as we close this interview, you and I share, along with Tim Achterhoff, a unique situation of we all grew up in the same neighborhood,
Yes.
but also there was a disc jockey by the name of Greg Nielsen on the air, but he was Greg Blackwell. I believe he also grew up in our neighborhood.
He's a friend of mine.
And
Sure.
then, of course, there's our buddy from the PTL Club,
Jimmy Baker.
Jimmy Baker and Tammy Faye. But Jimmy Baker grew up halfway between where you and I grew up.
Yes.
I mean, he was over on Houston, I was on 4th, and you were
Monroe.
down by Nelson.
Yeah.
And so you think about that. I always said, what was in the water? Tim Achterhoff, all of us, the 5 of us, all grew up within a mile or mile and a half of each other. And we all ended up being professional broadcasters on one level or another.
There is a movie, what is it, The Eyes of Tammy Faye? Have you seen that?
I haven't.
There is a point where he and Tammy are talking about his early days and getting into radio.
Okay.
Come on, Jim. Come on, the writers. You got to mention Frank Poling. Come on. They didn't, but
Well,
there
I
was that
assume Frank
connection.
had to be his instructor
definitely.
because Frank got there in 52.
Yeah.
And he was there 20 years at Muskegon High School. And in 20 years, Frank Poling had 20 people that came out of his classes who became professional broadcasters. I have to believe that Jim Baker was one of them.
Yes, same.
Yeah.
The timing is
Yes,
is
it was
exactly
right in the middle
correct.
of when he was there. And if you think about it, Frank Poling providing that class was very evolutionary for what was being taught in high schools at that stage. We're talking the 1950s, 60s. This guy was teaching radio TV at high school level and producing professional broadcasters.
Yes.
Way ahead of his time.
And he knew the business, so he knew exactly how you were supposed to deliver yourself on the air.
Yeah.
And he would listen and he would offer recommendations and incorporate those things.
Yeah.
It was great. It was really great.
He was a very good teacher, and he really, like you said, he got you involved. He got me involved. He introduced me formally to Tim Achterhoff on a station tour when I was like 11th grade.
Wow.
Pretty soon, 2 years later, I'm on the air at MUS. I mean, same thing, right? He convinced you to try radio.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Wouldn't trade any of it, would you, my friend?
No. It's been something that has had a tremendous impact on my life.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for radio, I wouldn't have written the radio system. I wouldn't have probably been an instructor at college. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have been living overseas the way that I am now.
Yeah.
That was primarily through my sister, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't have designed a computer facility in northern Thailand for the first international school in that part of the country, or made friends by doing so.
Yeah.
It has had tremendous influence on my life, and still does.
Harry Brown, longtime broadcaster, media personality in Muskegon, part of the Radio's Legend series. Thank you very much, Harry. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Leonard. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.